Most applications start simple. A controller receives a request, performs some logic, stores data, and returns a response. Nothing looks wrong, but over time, one development person quietly begins to create maintainability problems. Developers keep adding responsibilities to controllers. Today, I want to break down why that happens, why it becomes dangerous, and how Laravel provides tools to avoid it. I'm Mark, and I document engineering decisions involved in building maintainable backend systems. The reason fat controllers appear is actually simple. Early in a project, speed feels more important than structure. You're implementing a feature, the controller already exists. Adding a few more lines seems harmless. Then another feature arrives, and another, then another. Each decision feels reasonable in isolation, but software is rarely judged by how it looks after the first week. The real challenge is how it remains after months of growth. Let's look at a typical example. A request arrives. Inside the controller, we validate the data. Then we perform inventory checks. Then we create records. Then we send notifications. Then we generate a response. The problem isn't that any individual piece is wrong here. The problem is responsibility accumulation. One class slowly becomes responsible for too many concerns. That makes it harder to understand what the controller is actually supposed to do. Let's take a real life example here to explain what a fat controller is. A fat controller is a manager who starts doing accounting, customer support, warehouse management, and sales. The problem isn't capability, the problem is responsibility overload. Eventually, every decision depends on one person and everything slows down. One person has to make decisions on so many parts of the work. Having one person do all of that is too much load. But think of this, you have an operations manager, a sales manager, an accounting manager, customer support, and logistics tracker. You have all of these as individuals, each one in its domain doing something. Decision making is faster and there's more cohesion in the work. The biggest cause of fat controllers isn't the file size. The biggest cause is maintainability. Picture this, a bug appears, you open the controller. Now you must manually process the validation rules you define, the database interactions you created, the business workflows, the notifications, response generation. Every additional responsibility increases cognitive load. And cognitive load is one of the biggest hidden costs in software engineering. I, for one, I hate looking at much code. When I open up my text editor and I have to debug, and then where the error is, I see a whole bunch of code within it, and I already get mental fatigue before I even look for the line to fix the error. But now I'll much rather prefer having to separate stuff like my notifications, I separate from the controller, the business workflows, I separate them, validation rules, uniform requests, everything still in the same application, but bit by bit, little pieces everywhere. You accumulate them and the controller just manages them. That makes things easier for me. Let's take a practical Laravel example. Suppose we are creating products. Initially, the controller validates the request, performs inventory checks, creates the product, and sends notifications. Instead of keeping everything there, we can start separating concerns. Validation moves into a form request, business logic moves into an action class. The controller becomes responsible for orchestration only. Now, when requirements change, we are modifying focused components instead of a giant controller. You need to update any part of the project rather than going and scrolling through a whole chunk of controller code. Just get to the individual action or the form request, make the changes there, and the entire application understands those changes and it keeps working. One mindset shift helped me understand this better. Don't think about where the code lives. Think about who owns the responsibility. The request should validate, the action should perform work, the model should persist data, your resource should format output. When each component owns a single responsibility, the system becomes easier to reason about. This principle applies far beyond Laravel. Be it you use Node.js, Django, or whichever framework of your choice, this applies for all of them. Separating responsibilities doesn't make the application instantly better. You could still have your errors, but here feature becomes easier to add. Testing becomes easier, debugging becomes easier. Now developers understand the system faster. Most importantly, the code base remains adaptable as complexity grows. Imagine you have to share your work with another developer to maybe go through, maybe it's your supervisor and he has to go through. If you separate concerns cleanly, you have everything like your form requests, like your form data being processed in the form request, your action classes process, loading form data and creating a new resource. If you have that clearly defined, another person takes your application. It's just like writing notes and specifying headings with a red pen. Write your notes, specify headings with a red pen. Then, if you're having some points to jot down, you use asterisks and specify. The lesson isn't that controllers should contain no code. The lesson is that controllers shouldn't become owners of the application. They should coordinate workflows. When validation, business logic, and persistence are separated properly, maintainability improves dramatically. Fat controllers often feel productive early, but they become liabilities later. Over the next few weeks, I'll continue documenting engineering decisions involved in building maintainable Laravel systems. Upcoming topics include service and action patterns, query organization, reducing duplication, API design, performance considerations, systems thinking in backend development. Laravel will be the primary stack, but the principles apply to backend engineering as a whole. If you've encountered maintainability issues caused by growing controllers, I'll be interested in hearing how you've approached solving them. Thank you for watching.